The crystal glass trembled in Aurelia's hand, the chilled champagne inside doing nothing to cool the fire of anxiety in her stomach. It was their 5th anniversary, a milestone meant to be celebrated in this rooftop restaurant with its panoramic views of the city lights. But the man across the table, her husband, Connor Hewitt, was a stranger. His eyes, once full of warmth, were now cold, distant panes of glass, reflecting the city. But not her. Not her, or the gentle swell of their unborn son beneath the silk of her dress. He hadn't touched her, hadn't truly looked at her all night. And she knew with the gut-wrenching certainty that only a woman deeply in love can feel when it curdles into dread that this perfect evening was about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. The Hewitt residence in the exclusive suburb of Willow Creek was a monument to modern success. A sprawling architectural marvel of glass, steel, and polished concrete. It was a house that graced the covers of design magazines. It was also a house that Aurelia had helped design a collaboration that was supposed to be the cornerstone of their shared life. Now it felt like a gilded cage, each floor-to-ceiling window, a bar keeping her trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside. Connor Hewitt was the architect of that perfection. He was the charismatic CEO of Innovate Dynamics, a tech startup that had exploded onto the scene, promising to revolutionize data security. He was handsome, driven, and lauded by the press as a visionary. To the world, he was the perfect husband, doting on his beautiful, pregnant wife. But in the quiet, cavernous rooms of their home, the applause faded, and the real Connor emerged. He was a man of moods, of subtle corrections and quiet dismissals that chipped away at Aurelia's confidence like water eroding stone. "You're wearing that?" he'd asked earlier that evening, his eyes scanning her bespoke maternity gown, a soft dove-grey silk that had cost a small fortune. "It's for our anniversary," Aurelia replied, her hand instinctively going to her rounded belly. "I thought you'd like it. It's a bit voluminous, don't you think? It makes you look." He trailed off, waving a dismissive hand. "Never mind, we're going to be late." The "we" was a lie. He had already been an hour late coming home, striding in with the scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his suit jacket and an excuse about a last-minute investor meeting on his lips. Aurelia had learned not to question these meetings. Questioning led to arguments, and arguments led to a chilling silence that could last for days. A punishment worse than any shouted word. So she had smiled, ignored the pit in her stomach, and allowed him to lead her out to his gleaming sports car. Their life was a performance, and she was the lead actress tasked with maintaining the illusion of a flawless marriage. The anxiety that had started as a low hum in their silent car ride had crescendoed into a deafening roar by the time their appetizers arrived at The Pinnacle, a restaurant so exclusive you had to book months in advance. Connor had, of course, secured the best table. Everything had to be the best. It was all part of the brand. He spent most of the meal on his phone, thumbs flying across the screen with a feverish intensity. He would smile, but the smile never reached his eyes. It was a corporate smile, the one he used for shareholders and journalists. "Connor," Aurelia said softly, placing her hand over his. "Can we just be here tonight for us?" He pulled his hand away as if her touch had burned him, placing his phone face down on the pristine white tablecloth. "Of course, sweetheart. My apologies. Just a critical situation with the London office." He picked up his wine glass, to 5 years, and to the future. He clinked his glass against her water goblet. The sound felt hollow, empty. She tried to steer the conversation back to them, to the memories they had built. She spoke of their honeymoon in Italy, of the small, cramped apartment they had shared before his company took off, of the day they found out she was pregnant. "I was thinking," she said, her voice filled with a tentative hope, "about names for the baby. If it's a boy, I was thinking of Leo, after my father." Connor's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Your father was a good man, Aurelia. But he was a librarian. Not exactly the legacy of a titan, is it? We need a strong name. Something with impact." Her father, Lawrence, had been the kindest, most gentle man she had ever known. He had passed away 2 years ago, leaving her a modest inheritance. It was that inheritance, every last cent of it, that had been the seed money for Innovate Dynamics. It was the money that had funded Connor's dream, a fact he conveniently forgot to mention in his many interviews about being a self-made man. "My father's legacy is kindness and integrity," Aurelia said, her voice a little firmer than she intended. "I think that's a fine legacy for our son." Connor's jaw worked, and for a second the mask slipped. She saw a flash of pure, undiluted anger in his eyes. It was a look that terrified her. He was about to retort when his phone buzzed a persistent, demanding vibration against the table. He glanced at the screen, and the anger in his face was instantly replaced by something else. Something she couldn't quite read. A mix of urgency and affection. "I have to take this," he said, standing abruptly. "I'll be right back." He walked away from the table, not towards the restrooms, but towards the restaurant's private terrace. Through the glass doors, Aurelia watched him. She saw the way his posture changed, the way he leaned against the railing, his voice low and intimate. She saw him laugh, a genuine, relaxed laugh she hadn't heard directed at her in years. Her heart felt like a block of ice in her chest. She knew. She didn't want to know, had spent months, maybe even a year, actively not knowing, but the evidence was undeniable. The late nights, the unexplained credit card charges, the emotional void that had opened up between them. He wasn't just distant. He was living a separate life. When he returned to the table 10 minutes later, his mood had completely soured. The corporate charm was gone, replaced by a sullen impatience. "Let's get the check," he said, avoiding her gaze. "I'm tired." "Who was that Connor?" The question escaped her lips before she could stop it. It was quiet, fragile, but it hung in the air between them like a guillotine. He finally looked at her, his expression one of pure disdain. "It was work, Aurelia. You wouldn't understand." "Try me." She pushed a strange, reckless courage bubbling up inside her. Maybe it was the hormones, or maybe it was the primal instinct of a mother protecting her child from a life built on lies. "Who makes you smile like that on our anniversary?" "Drop it," he warned, his voice a low growl. But Aurelia couldn't. The dam of denial had broken, and years of suppressed pain and doubt were flooding out. "No, I won't drop it. We're sitting here pretending to celebrate 5 years of marriage, and you are emotionally and I suspect physically with someone else. Don't you dare lie to me tonight." His face paled, then flushed with a dark, mottled red. He looked around the restaurant, his primary concern, as always, being the audience. He leaned forward, his voice a venomous whisper. "You are making a scene. You are embarrassing me. After everything I've given you, this house, this life, this is how you repay me. With hysterical accusations." "What you've given me," she whispered back, tears welling in her eyes. "Connor, my money started your company. My father's money." That was it. The unforgivable truth. The one thing that punctured his carefully constructed myth of being a self-made genius. His control snapped. The air crackled with a sudden, violent energy. He didn't seem to see the other diners or the waiters. He only saw her the source of his narcissistic injury. Before she could even process his movement, his hand flew across the table. It wasn't a push. It was a slap. The sound was sharp, ugly, a crack that silenced the clinking of cutlery and the low murmur of conversation around them. The force of it snapped her head to the side, her cheek exploding with a white-hot, stinging pain. The shock was so profound, so absolute, that for a moment she couldn't breathe. Her husband, the father of her child, had just struck her in public on their 5th wedding anniversary. And then another woman's voice, sharp and proprietary, cut through her daze. "Connor, what's going on? Is she giving you trouble?" Aurelia turned her head slowly, her cheek throbbing. Standing beside their table was a woman. She was young, impeccably dressed in a sharp business suit, her expression a mask of cold arrogance. Aurelia recognized her from a company newsletter. Brooke Lynn, Connor's new vice president of strategy. The woman whose perfume had haunted their home. The woman who was now looking at Aurelia not with pity, but with contempt, as if she were a piece of trash to be disposed of. The entire restaurant seemed to be holding its breath, all eyes on their table. The humiliation was a physical force, pressing down on her, stealing the air from her lungs. Connor looked from Brooke to Aurelia, his face a mask of fury and panic. He had been caught, utterly and completely. And in that moment, as the sting on her cheek radiated through her face, and the ice in her heart solidified something inside, Aurelia shifted. The pain was still there, but beneath it, a new feeling was taking root. It was cold, hard, and sharp as a shard of glass. It was rage. But before the rage could find a voice, a different, more urgent sensation ripped through her. A sharp, powerful cramp seized her abdomen so intense it made her gasp. She looked down at the pristine white tablecloth at the chair beneath her. A dark, wet patch was spreading rapidly across the silk of her expensive dress. It wasn't a cramp. It was a contraction. A wave of liquid gushed from between her legs, warm and sudden. Her water had just broken. The world narrowed to a dizzying point of 3 things: the searing pain on her cheek, the escalating vice-like grip of the contraction in her abdomen, and the 2 faces staring down at her. Connor's face was a canvas of shock morphing into pure, selfish annoyance. Brooke Lynn's was a study in clinical distaste, her perfectly sculpted lips curled into a slight sneer. "My water," Aurelia managed to gasp, her hands flying to her belly as another contraction stronger than the first racked her body. "The baby. It's coming." The hushed whispers of the surrounding tables erupted into a low roar of alarm. A waiter rushed forward, his face pale. "Madame, are you all right? Should I call an ambulance?" Aurelia could only nod her breath, coming in ragged pants. The pain was blinding, eclipsing the humiliation for a brief, merciful moment. She looked at Connor, her husband, the man who was supposed to be her protector, her partner. She was looking for a flicker of concern, a shred of the man she had married. Instead, she saw him turn to Brooke. "Get the car," he hissed, his voice low and urgent. "Meet me at the front. We need to get out of here before the press gets wind of this." His priority was not his wife in premature labor. It was damage control. Brooke didn't hesitate. She shot Aurelia a final triumphant glare before turning on her heel and marching towards the exit, her phone already pressed to her ear. "Connor," Aurelia pleaded, her voice trembling. The pain in her heart was now competing with the physical agony. "Please, my baby. Don't be so dramatic, Aurelia." He snapped his eyes, darting around the room, assessing the fallout. He was calculating angles, planning his PR spin. "You're fine. The ambulance is coming." He reached into his wallet and threw a wad of cash onto the table, not even bothering to look at the bill. "I have to handle this situation you've created." The situation she had created. The words were like another slap. He was blaming her. For his affair, for his violence, for their son's dangerously early arrival. He turned to leave to follow his mistress out of the wreckage of their marriage. But Aurelia's hand, surprisingly strong, shot out and grabbed his wrist. "You are not leaving me," she said, her voice raw with a power she didn't know she possessed. "You are not leaving me here, alone." He tried to wrench his arm away, his face contorting with rage. "Let go of me, Aurelia. You're making things worse. Worse than you hitting your pregnant wife in front of your girlfriend," she shot back, her voice rising. The other diners were now openly staring, their phones held up, no doubt, recording the entire sordid affair. Let them. Let the whole world see him for what he was. The restaurant manager and 2 waiters were now by her side, helping her to her feet. The manager, a kind-faced man named Mr. Dubois, shot Connor a look of utter contempt. "Sir, I think you should stay with your wife. An ambulance is 2 minutes out." Connor looked trapped. The cameras, the disapproving eyes of the strangers, the manager's quiet authority. It was a cage of public opinion, the only kind he respected. He was trapped not by love or duty, but by the optics of the situation. With a frustrated sigh, he allowed the waiters to guide them towards a more private waiting area near the entrance. He walked stiffly, a foot of space between them, as if her touch might contaminate him. The next few minutes were a blur of pain and logistics. Paramedics arrived, their calm professionalism a stark contrast to the chaos Connor had created. They loaded her onto a gurney, their questions about her medical history and the frequency of her contractions a steady rhythm in the storm. Connor followed them, his face a thunderous mask. He answered the paramedics' questions with curt, monosyllabic responses. He never once looked at Aurelia. He never once touched her hand. His presence was a technicality, a body filling a space where a husband was supposed to be. As they wheeled her out of the restaurant, past a sea of stunned and curious faces, she saw Brooke waiting by the valet stand next to Connor's gleaming Aston Martin. The mistress wasn't leaving. She was waiting for him. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, and in Brooke's gaze Aurelia saw not a hint of remorse, only the cold, hard glint of victory. She had won. In the back of the ambulance, the siren wailed a fitting soundtrack to the destruction of her life. A paramedic was checking her blood pressure, his voice calm and reassuring. "Deep breaths, Mrs. Hewitt. Everything is going to be all right. Your husband is following right behind us." Aurelia turned her head to look out the back window. She saw Connor's car pull away from the curb, but it didn't follow the ambulance. It turned in the opposite direction, speeding off into the night, with Brooke Lynn in the passenger seat. He had left her. He had chosen his mistress over his wife and his unborn child in the most critical moment of their lives. The paramedic saw the look on her face. "Ma'am!" A single hot tear traced a path through the cooling sting of the slap mark on her cheek. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, it left no room for hope. The man she had loved, the life she had built it, was all a lie. The shattering was complete. As another contraction ripped through her, more powerful than all the ones before, the grief and the rage and the pain coalesced into a single, diamond-hard point of clarity. She was alone, but she would not be broken. She would have this baby, and she would survive. And one day Connor Hewitt would not just regret this night. He would pay for it. He would pay for every lie, every moment of cruelty, and every ounce of pain he had inflicted. The foundation of her revenge was laid in that ambulance, on a bed of shattered illusions and broken promises, watered by the tears of a woman utterly betrayed. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor hummed a relentless, sterile tune. For 14 hours, Aurelia's world had been a crucible of pain, fear, and sheer animalistic effort. The birth of her son was nothing like the calm, serene water birth she and Connor had planned in a ridiculously expensive birthing suite. It was a frantic emergency affair in a stark, white room, surrounded by the beeping of machines and the urgent voices of strangers. Leo Hewitt was born at 3:17 a.m. Small but miraculously healthy, with a tuft of dark hair and a cry that was both fragile and furious. As the nurse placed him on Aurelia's chest, his tiny, wrinkled body warm against her skin, the storm inside her stilled. The pain, the betrayal, the humiliation, it all receded, replaced by an overwhelming, primal wave of love that was so fierce it took her breath away. This tiny creature was hers. He was the only thing that was real. Her son was her anchor, but the emptiness of the room was a constant gnawing presence. Connor had never shown up. She had asked the nurses twice. "Has my husband arrived, a Mr. Connor Hewitt?" Both times the answer was a gentle, pitying, "No, dear, not yet. We have his number if you'd like us to call again." "No," Aurelia had said the second time, her voice flat. "Don't." He had made his choice. Calling him would be begging for scraps of affection from a man whose table was bare. The only person who came was Sophie, her best friend since college. Sophie burst into the room at dawn, her face a mess of smeared mascara and frantic worry. She had seen a gossip blogger's post on social media, a blurry photo of Aurelia on a gurney, a video clip of Connor's car speeding away. "Oh, Aud," Sophie whispered, her voice breaking as she took in the scene. Aurelia, pale and exhausted, with a faint purpling bruise blooming on her cheek, cradling a newborn. "That bastard! That absolute monster!" Sophie didn't ask questions. She just acted. She fluffed Aurelia's pillows, filled her water cup, and held Leo with the tenderness of a seasoned aunt, cooing at him and telling him how much stronger and smarter he was than his father would ever be. She was a whirlwind of fierce, protective love, and for the first time in hours, Aurelia didn't feel completely alone. "What do you need?" Sophie asked, her tone shifting from soft to steely. "A lawyer, a moving van, a private investigator. Just say the word. I have a cousin who knows a guy who can make people disappear." Aurelia managed a weak, watery smile. "A lawyer sounds like a good start." Later that day, a nurse entered with a ridiculously large bouquet of white lilies. The scent was cloying, funereal. The card was propped in the center. Aurelia's heart gave a stupid, hopeful little flutter before she crushed it. The card read, "Congratulations on the new arrival. Urgent business has called me to our European office. We'll be in touch. C." There was no love, no apology, no mention of the slap or his abandonment. It was a press release, a sterile corporate memo. And the lilies, they were the flowers he sent to business associates after a deal closed. She realized with a sickening lurch that this was exactly what this was to him. The birth of his son was an inconvenient event to be managed, and she was an employee to be placated. The urgent business was almost certainly a hastily planned getaway with Brooke. That was the moment the last vestiges of the old Aurelia died. The woman who made excuses for him, who absorbed his moods, who clung to the memory of the man he once was. She was gone. In her place was a mother whose child had been abandoned by his father within hours of his birth. A mother who had been publicly assaulted and humiliated. She looked at the bruise on her cheek in the small mirror of her compact. It was a gift, a reminder. Every time she felt a pang of nostalgia, every time she was tempted to remember the good times, she would remember the sound of that slap and the feeling of his absence. She picked up her phone, her fingers moving with a newfound purpose. She scrolled through her contacts past the friends and family who would offer sympathy and casseroles to a name she hadn't needed in years. Desmond Pierce. Mr. Pierce had been her father's lawyer and closest friend. A sharp, semi-retired corporate litigator with a reputation for being a shark in a tailored suit. After her father's death, he had managed the estate and overseen the transfer of her inheritance to Connor's venture. He had advised against it. "Aurelia," he had said at the time, his kind eyes full of concern. "This is every penny your father left you. To invest it all in a high-risk startup, even one run by your husband, it's unwise. Love is not a substitute for due diligence." She hadn't listened. She had been blinded by love and by Connor's dazzling promises of a shared future. She pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring, his voice as crisp and precise as she remembered. "Pierce?" "Mr. Pierce," Aurelia said, her voice shaking slightly. "It's Aurelia, Lawrence's daughter." There was a brief pause, then warmth filled his tone. "Aurelia, my dear, what a pleasant surprise. How are you?" "I'm in the hospital," she said, cutting straight to the point. "I just had my baby. A boy." "Oh, wonderful congratulations. I trust Connor is floating on air." The dam broke. In a low, steady voice, devoid of hysteria, Aurelia told him everything. The anniversary dinner, the mistress, the public slap, the abandonment at the restaurant, her water breaking, the ambulance ride alone, the sterile text message of a card. She left nothing out. The line was chewed for a long time. When Mr. Pierce finally spoke, the warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, controlled fury that was far more terrifying than any shouting. "Aurelia," he said, his voice like chipping ice. "First, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Do not contact him. Do not answer his calls or texts. Let him think you are broken and hysterical. Second, your friend Sophie, can you trust her implicitly?" "Yes," Aurelia said without hesitation. "With my life." "Good. Have her go to your house. She has a key." "Yes." "In the study behind the collection of first edition classics your father gave you, there is a safe. Your father insisted Connor install it when you moved in. The combination is your father's birthday. Inside is a hard drive and a blue leather-bound ledger. I need her to retrieve them and bring them to my office. Immediately. Tell her not to speak to anyone." Aurelia was confused. A hard drive? A ledger? What are they? "They are your father's due diligence," Mr. Pierce said, his voice grim. "Lawrence loved you very much, Aurelia, but he did not trust your husband. He made me promise to keep this for you just in case. It seems just in case has arrived." A flicker of hope, fierce and bright, ignited in the cold darkness of her hospital room. Her father, the gentle librarian, had seen the truth of Connor Hewitt long before she had, and from beyond the grave, he had just handed her a weapon. "Mr. Pierce," she said, her voice no longer trembling, but filled with a resolve of forged steel. I don't just want a divorce. I want to ruin him. I want to take back everything he built with my father's money, and my broken heart. There was another pause on the line, and she could almost hear the slow, satisfied smile forming on the old lawyer's face. "My dear Aurelia," Desmond Pierce said, "I believe that can be arranged." The first week of Leo's life was a strange paradox. It was a time of incredible tenderness and intimacy, of late-night feedings in the quiet of her private hospital room, the soft weight of her son sleeping on her chest. But it was also the beginning of a war. While Aurelia learned the rhythms of motherhood, Desmond Pierce began assembling their arsenal. Sophie had followed his instructions to the letter. She had slipped into the Willow Creek house while the housekeeper was out, her heart pounding. The first editions stood on the shelf in Connor's immaculate study, untouched and unread, mere props in the stage play of his life. Behind them, the safe was flush with the wall, her father's birthday. A date seared into her memory, opened it on the first try. Inside, just as Mr. Pierce had said, were a slim external hard drive and a handsome blue ledger. Sophie had delivered them to the lawyer's downtown office without a word to anyone. When Aurelia was discharged, she didn't go back to the gilded cage. Sophie had a spare bedroom in her cozy apartment, which she had quickly converted into a nursery. It was small, a little cluttered, and filled with more love than the entire Hewitt mansion. Connor, true to his word, was in Europe. He sent short, impersonal texts every couple of days. "Hope you and the baby are well. Closing a big deal here. We'll wire money for expenses." He never asked for a picture of his son. He never called. It was clear he was giving her space, which Aurelia knew was code for him enjoying his trip with Brooke while waiting for Aurelia's hysterics to die down so he could return and smooth things over. He was underestimating her. It was the biggest mistake he would ever make. A week after Leo was born, Mr. Pierce called a meeting at his office. The space was old-world elegance, mahogany desk, leather-bound books, and a view of the city's financial district. He looked at Aurelia sitting across from him, with Leo sleeping soundly in a carrier at her feet, and gave her a sad smile. "Your father was a meticulous man." He began placing the blue ledger on the desk between them. "When you gave Connor your inheritance, Lawrence was distraught. He hired a private firm to do a full background and financial deep dive on Mr. Hewitt." He opened the ledger. The pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting, her father's. It detailed every asset Connor had at the time of their marriage, which was next to nothing: a mountain of student debt, a leased car, and a failing consulting business. "Your inheritance," Mr. Pierce continued, tapping a line item for $1.2 million, "was not seed money, Aurelia. It was all the money. It paid off his debts, leased the first office, and hired the initial programmers. But that's not the most important part." He turned the page. "Your father, bless his cautious soul, didn't just give Connor the money. He had me structure it as a loan, a convertible note." Aurelia stared at him, uncomprehending. "A loan?" Connor told me. "It was an investment. That I was an equity partner. Did you ever sign any documents to that effect? Were you ever issued a stock certificate?" Aurelia thought back. "He said it was all being handled by his corporate attorneys, that it was complicated, and I shouldn't worry my pretty little head about it." The memory made her feel sick. "Of course he did," Mr. Pierce said, his voice laced with acid. "According to this note which Connor Hewitt signed, if the loan was not repaid in full upon the 5th anniversary of the issuance date, you had the option to convert the debt into a 40% equity stake in Innovate Dynamics. Aurelia's breath hitched. The 5th anniversary. That was the night of the dinner. Precisely, the lawyer confirmed. The night he defaulted. By my reading, you don't just have grounds for divorce, Aurelia. You are for all intents and purposes the single largest shareholder in his company. The room tilted. 40%. It was a staggering amount. Connor owned 51% a controlling interest, but her 40% would make her a force he couldn't possibly ignore or remove. But that's not all, Mr. Pierce said, his expression darkening. He slid the hard drive across the desk. Lawrence was worried Connor might try to dilute your investment or devalue the company. So he paid a programmer, a white-hat hacker, to design a piece of tracking software. Connor thought it was a new security protocol for the company. It was, but it had a back door. It copied every file, every email, every financial transaction from the Innovate Dynamics servers to this encrypted drive. It's been running silently for 4 years. This was beyond anything Aurelia could have imagined. Her gentle, book-loving father had orchestrated a brilliant Trojan horse. For the next 2 months, Aurelia's life became a clandestine operation. By day, she was a new mother, tending to Leo, taking him for walks in the park, and presenting the perfect image of a woman healing from a marital spat. But by night, after Leo was asleep, she and Sophie would huddle over a laptop in the small apartment with Mr. Pierce on a secure video call, sifting through the contents of the hard drive. They hired a forensic accountant, a stoic woman named Ms. Chen, who joined their nightly calls. Together they navigated the labyrinth of Connor's digital life. It was a journey into the soul of a man she thought she knew, and it was uglier than she could have conceived. There were emails between Connor and Brooke, hundreds of them. They were filled with cruel jokes at Aurelia's expense, mocking her pregnancy, her tastes, her naivete. They had been having an affair for nearly 2 years. They planned their future in her house on vacations paid for with her money. That was painful, but it was the financial documents that were truly damning. Ms. Chen uncovered a web of deceit that was breathtaking in its audacity. Connor had set up a series of shell corporations in offshore havens. He was using Innovate Dynamics as his personal piggy bank, funneling millions of dollars out of the company under the guise of consulting fees, licensing agreements, and R&D expenses paid to these phantom entities. He's bleeding the company dry, Ms. Chen stated one night, her voice flat and professional, but her eyes wide with the scale of the fraud. He's artificially inflating profits on the books to attract a second round of venture capital funding. But in reality, he's siphoning off the actual cash. They discovered the end game. Connor was in talks with a major tech conglomerate, a giant named Axiom Global, for a buyout. His plan was to sell Innovate Dynamics for an astronomical sum, upwards of $300 million, based on fraudulent growth and profit numbers. Once the deal was done, he would be long gone with his millions, and Brooke by his side, leaving the new owners with a hollowed-out company and the original investors with pennies on the dollar. He was not just cheating on his wife. He was planning a massive corporate heist. And Brooke wasn't just a passive girlfriend. Her digital signature was on half the fraudulent expense reports. She was a willing, active participant in the entire scheme. Aurelia felt a cold, chilling fury. This wasn't just about her father's money anymore. It was about the employees Connor was planning to betray, the investors he was swindling. He was a cancer, and he was about to metastasize. The buyout? Aurelia asked, her voice tight. When is it happening? Mr. Pierce pulled up a calendar. The final presentation to the Axiom Global Board is in 3 weeks. He's due back from Europe a week before that to prepare. Then we have a deadline, Aurelia said. She looked from the sleeping face of her son to the mountain of evidence on her screen. The time for hiding was almost over. The time for assembling the pieces was done. Soon it would be time to act. Connor Hewitt returned from his 3-month European business trip a week before the Axiom Global meeting, tanned, relaxed, and dripping with condescending magnanimity. He arrived not at Sophie's small apartment, but at the Willow Creek house, expecting to find his wife waiting suitably chastened and ready to accept his apology. He was surprised to find the house empty. His first call to Aurelia went to voicemail. His second an hour later was answered. "Aurelia, you're not home." He stated not a question but an accusation. "No, Connor, I'm not," she replied, her voice cool and even. She had practiced this call with Mr. Pierce for hours, rehearsing her lines like an actress preparing for a career-defining role. "Look, I know you're upset," he began, launching into a pre-rehearsed speech. "I behaved abominably. It was the stress, the pressure of the deal, and I was drinking. It's no excuse, I know. And I am so sorry. I miss you. I miss my family. I want to see my son. Can I please come see you? We need to talk." Every word was a carefully chosen lie, designed to manipulate and control. The old Aurelia would have dissolved into tears, desperate to believe him. The new Aurelia recognized it for the performance it was. "I don't know, Connor," she said, injecting a note of weary hesitation into her voice. You hit me. You left me." "It was the biggest mistake of my life," he said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "Let me make it up to you, to both of you. Please, Aurelia. Let me come home." "Home," she repeated softly. "Yes, home. You, me, and Leo. Here, in our house, where we belong." This was the opening they had been waiting for. "I need some time to think," she said, and hung up. For 2 days she let him stew. He sent a barrage of texts, each more desperate than the last, professing his undying love and regret. He had florists deliver bouquets so massive they barely fit through Sophie's door. He even had a high-end baby boutique deliver a mountain of gifts for Leo. He was trying to buy his way back into her life. On the 3rd day, she agreed to meet him. Not at the house, but on neutral ground, a quiet corner of a local park. She arrived with Leo in a stroller, looking pale and fragile, the very picture of a wronged wife. He looked haggard, a performance of sleepless nights and regret. He begged for her forgiveness. He swore the affair with Brooke was a meaningless mistake and that it was over. He had fired her, he claimed, to prove his commitment to Aurelia. It was a lie, of course. The hard drive showed that Brooke had simply been moved to an off-the-books consultant role to continue her work on the Axiom deal. "I want to believe you," Aurelia whispered, looking down at her son. "For his sake, I want to believe you." "Then come home," he urged, reaching for her hand. "Let us be a family." This was the most difficult part of the plan. She had to willingly walk back into the cage. She had to live under the same roof as the man she now loathed, to smile at him, to let him touch her, all while plotting his complete and utter destruction. "On one condition," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "She is gone. For good. I never want to see her or hear her name again." "Done," he swore, his eyes shining with triumph. He thought he had won. Moving back into the house was a surreal experience. The beautiful rooms felt tainted, haunted by the memory of her pain and his betrayal. Connor was on his best behavior, a model of the repentant husband. He changed diapers. He cooed over Leo. He brought Aurelia breakfast in bed. It was a nauseatingly brilliant performance. He was so convinced of his own charm that he never once suspected her compliance was just a mask. Her true purpose for being there was the study. Connor's entire operation was run from his custom-built desktop computer and the private server in the adjoining closet. The hard drive had given them a snapshot, but Mr. Pierce and Miss Chen needed real-time data, especially the final polished presentation he was preparing for Axiom Global, the one that would be full of lies and inflated numbers. Her opportunity came 2 nights before the big meeting. Connor had a celebratory dinner with his executive team, a last hurrah before the buyout. He invited Aurelia, but she declined using Leo as an excuse. "You go," she said, with a soft, forgiving smile. "You deserve it. We'll be fine here." The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, she was in motion. With Leo sleeping peacefully in his monitor-equipped bassinet in the corner of the study, Aurelia went to work. Sophie arrived moments later, acting as a lookout. Connor was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. His computer was password-protected. But Aurelia knew his ego. She tried Leo's birthday. Nothing. She tried their anniversary. Nothing. Then she remembered his obsession with legacy and impact. She typed in Axiom 01. The screen unlocked. He had used the name of his prize as his password. The hubris was breathtaking. Working quickly following the precise instructions Ms. Chen had given her, she plugged in a small, innocuous-looking USB drive. It wasn't a storage device. It was a keylogger and a remote access Trojan. Within seconds, it had installed itself completely invisible to any standard security scan. From that moment on, everything Connor typed, every file he opened, every email he sent, would be mirrored in real time on Ms. Chen's secure server. Next, the server closet. This was the heart of his kingdom. It contained not only the company's financials, but also his personal offshore account details. It was protected by a biometric fingerprint scanner. He had always bragged that it was unbreachable. But Aurelia the architect knew something he had forgotten. When they were designing the house, she had insisted on a failsafe. In the event of a power failure or system malfunction, there was a manual override, a small hidden keypad behind a loose baseboard. She had memorized the master code, a string of numbers she had created herself based on her father's initials and library card number. The keypad glowed to life. She entered the code. With a soft click, the server's magnetic lock disengaged. Inside, she and Sophie worked for an hour, using a high-speed drive cloner to create a perfect bit-for-bit copy of his entire private server. It was the digital equivalent of his soul, and she now owned it. Just as they finished, Sophie's phone buzzed. "He's on his way back," she whispered. "His car just turned onto the main road. 10 minutes max." They worked in a silent, frantic rush. They replaced the baseboard, erased their footprints, and removed any trace of their presence. Sophie slipped out the back door, just as Aurelia heard the garage door opener rumble. She rushed out of the study, closing the door behind her, and scooped Leo out of his bassinet, mussing her hair to look like she had just woken up. When Connor walked in, flushed with champagne and victory, he saw his wife standing at the top of the stairs, rocking their son in her arms. She looked like a Madonna, the perfect image of domestic tranquility. "Hey," she said with a sleepy smile. "How was it?" "It was great," he said, beaming up at her, his eyes full of adoration for the life he thought he had successfully reclaimed. "Everything's falling into place." "I'm so happy for you, Connor," she said, and the lie was so perfect, so smooth, it almost scared her. He had no idea that the woman standing before him was not his wife, but his executioner. He had brought the Trojan horse inside his own walls, and the soldiers hidden within were now ready to burn his empire to the ground. The final 48 hours before the Axiom Global meeting were the most tense of Aurelia's life. She played her part as the forgiving wife, a role that grated on her soul with every passing moment. By now, her team had everything. Thanks to the keylogger and cloned server, they had a complete picture of Connor's fraud, the offshore accounts, the doctored financials, and incriminating emails detailing the conspiracy with Brooke. They even had a copy of his personal calendar, which showed a one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands, booked for the day after the deal was set to close. He was planning to run. While Aurelia maintained the facade at home, Desmond Pierce prepared a meticulous legal assault. He drafted motions for an emergency asset freeze and compiled a damning package of evidence for both the district attorney and the SEC. He also contacted the two original investors in Innovate Dynamics, old friends of Aurelia's father, whom Connor had sidelined. Presented with the proof they had long suspected, they immediately joined Aurelia's cause, forming a united, powerful front. The night before the meeting, Connor was euphoric. He came home with a black velvet box containing a brilliant diamond necklace. "A pre-celebration," he said, fastening it around her neck, his fingers cold against her skin. "For the woman who stood by me. Tomorrow, Aurelia, our new life begins." She met his gaze in the mirror, the diamonds glittering like chips of ice. She forced a perfect empty smile. "I can't wait." That night she lay beside him, listening to the even sound of his breathing, and felt utterly detached. He was a stranger, a villain in a story whose final chapter she was about to write. She thought of her son Leo sleeping in the next room, and knew she was doing this not just for revenge, but to reclaim the legacy of integrity his grandfather had left him. Connor left the next morning, dressed in his most powerful suit, a titan ready to claim his crown. "Wish me luck," he said, kissing her cheek. "You don't need it," she replied, her voice neutral. "You've already sealed your fate." He laughed, taking it as a compliment. As soon as he was gone, Aurelia began her own preparations. She dressed not in a suit of armor, but in a simple, elegant navy blue dress, her only adornment, her father's gold locket. At 9:30 a.m., she met Mr. Pierce and her fellow investors, Robert and Graham, their faces grim and resolute. Their plan was precise. They weren't going to interrupt the Axiom meeting. That would only create chaos. Instead, Mr. Pierce had called an emergency meeting of the Innovate Dynamics board for 9:45 a.m. in their own boardroom. As expected, Connor had arrogantly dismissed the summons, replying that he had a prior commitment and would circle back later. He had no idea the meeting was a trap. The bait was his own mistress. Mr. Pierce had sent an anonymous tip to Brooke Lynn, warning her that Connor was planning to cut her out of the Axiom deal at the last minute. Her paranoia and greed, he wagered, would be too strong for her to ignore the emergency meeting. At 9:55 a.m., Aurelia sat with her allies in the silent boardroom. She took her place at the head of the table, Connor's seat. The trap was set. They were just waiting for their first victim to arrive. Right on cue, the boardroom door opened, and Brooke Lynn strode in. Her face flushed with anger and suspicion, walking straight into the reckoning that had been so carefully prepared for her. Brooke Lynn strode into the boardroom, her face a mask of angry confusion that shattered the moment she saw the assembly. Before she could speak, the large screen at the end of the table lit up, displaying a wire transfer from Innovate Dynamics to an offshore shell corporation signed by both her and Connor. "This is one of 37 fraudulent transfers," Mr. Pierce stated, his voice cutting through the silence. "We have all of them." Just then the door swung open again. Connor Hewitt stood there, briefcase in hand. "What in God's name is so—" He froze, his gaze sweeping across the room. He saw his partners, their faces like stone. He saw Mr. Pierce. And then he saw Aurelia sitting at the head of the table, where he should be, her expression one of unnerving calm. In an instant he knew. "Aurelia!" He stammered, his bravado vanishing. "What is this?" "This is a board meeting, Connor," she replied, her voice steady. "And as the 40% equity holder in this company, I believe I'm entitled to attend." Connor paled. 40%. "That's impossible. The convertible note you signed came due on your 5th anniversary," Mr. Pierce interjected coldly. "The night you defaulted and assaulted your wife. She has exercised her option. It's airtight." The screen flickered again, showing a slide from Connor's Axiom presentation with its fraudulent profit projections. Next to it, the real numbers appeared from the cloned server, a company bleeding millions. "You're a fraud, Connor," Graham said, his voice thick with rage. "You were going to sell a lie and leave us all holding the bag." Desperate, Connor turned back to Aurelia, his voice dropping to a pleading whisper. "Aurelia, please. We can fix this. Think of Leo. Think of our family." Aurelia rose and walked until she stood directly before him. "I am thinking of Leo," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "I am securing the legacy of integrity his grandfather left for him. Something you know nothing about." She reached up and unclasped the diamond necklace he had given her. She let it fall, the clatter of the stones on the marble floor echoing in the tense silence. "Your new life is beginning, Connor," she said, "just not the one you planned." On cue, the boardroom doors opened to admit 2 detectives. "Connor Hewitt," one said, his voice flatly official. "You're under arrest for wire fraud and embezzlement. Ms. Lynn, you'll come with us." As handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Connor's composure finally broke. He lunged towards Aurelia, his face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. "You!" he screamed, his voice raw and unhinged. "You did this! You ruined me!" Aurelia didn't flinch. She simply watched as the officers dragged him from the room, followed by a sobbing Brooke Lynn. The Titan had fallen, leaving nothing but the pathetic echo of his own rage. Mr. Pierce placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's over." Aurelia looked out the window at the city skyline. It wasn't over. It was a beginning. She had reclaimed her foundation and would now build a future for herself and her son, not on lies, but on strength and unbreakable truth. In the end, Connor Hewitt was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Brooke Lynn, in exchange for her testimony, received a lesser sentence of 3. The Axiom Global deal fell through, but under Aurelia's new leadership, Innovate Dynamics was restructured from the ground up. She used what was left of the company's capital to make the wronged investors whole, prioritizing integrity over profit. Slowly but surely, she rebuilt the company into something her father would have been proud of. A business founded on the very principles Connor had scorned. Aurelia never sought revenge for the sake of cruelty, but for the sake of justice. She reclaimed her power, her future, and her son's legacy not by stooping to her husband's level, but by rising far above it, proving that the strongest empires are built not on deceit, but on an unbreakable foundation of truth. If you were moved by Aurelia's journey from betrayal to triumph, and if you believe in the power of fighting back, please show your support. Hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true-life stories of justice and empowerment. Thank you for listening.